Pope Francis making the statement that my papacy will be for about 4 to 5 years. This is actually a very important statement made by Pope Francis. There is a certain prophecy. Now, this is not an Islamic prophecy, not even a Christian prophecy, in the sense that it's to be extracted from Christian eschatology or from the Bible. But this prophecy is made by a person who is named Malachi, and the Roman Catholics, they refer to him as Saint Malachi, and he made a prophecy that there are going to be 112 popes, and the papacy will end with the 112th pope. The list contains both popes and anti-popes. In fact, the 112th pope is considered to be an anti-pope. The list contains both the names of popes and anti-popes, the way he defined it, and this is actually the last pope. If this prophecy is correct, I'm not saying it's correct, it has to be believed, but this prophecy is remarkable in many ways. It fits the description of the popes, the 112 popes, in a remarkable fashion. Now, this person, Malachi, he lived in the period, he made the prophecy, this was in the 12th century, way back. He lived in 1000 to 1100, in that range. So he made these prophecies way back, and this was first time reported, or this came out for the first time around the 1500 year mark. Even then, some 500 years have passed since then, and some of the prophecies are remarkable. And we all know the time is actually very close to the Malhama, or to the Armageddon, and things will be very different then as it is now. So the entire political framework and entire economic framework, whatever framework, it's going to be very, very different from as it is now. So if this prophecy, again I'm saying, if this prophecy is to be believed, then there are 112 popes. In that case, Pope Francis, the 112th pope, is actually the last pope.
One of the most well-known predictions in Catholic history is the prophecy of the popes and anti-popes that is attributed to Saint Malachi. Saint Malachi was a Catholic bishop born in 1094 in Ireland. He died in the presence of his good friend Saint Bernard in 1148. Saint Bernard said that Saint Malachi foretold the day and hour of his own death. Saint Malachi was canonized in 1190, and a reading for his feast day mentions that he was blessed with the gift of prophecy. According to the 1913 Catholic Encyclopedia under the title of Prophecy, it says that Saint Malachi was called to Rome in 1139 by Pope Innocent II. While in Rome, it is reported that Saint Malachi experienced a vision of future claimants to the papacy till the second coming of Jesus Christ. Saint Malachi wrote 112 short Latin phrases describing all these future claimants to the papacy, giving titles to both popes and anti-popes. The document was then reportedly placed in the Vatican's secret archives and wasn't discovered until 1556 by a Vatican librarian. The document was first published 39 years later in 1595 by historian Arnold de Wyon in a book called Tree of Life. De Wyon was assisted in his translation of the document by Alfonso Chacon, a well-known scholar of medieval manuscripts. Chacon was given the job of authenticating the document and making sure it wasn't a forgery. After examining the document, Chacon verified it as authentic. While God apparently showed Saint Malachi the different men who in the future would claim to be the leaders of the Catholic Church, he did not necessarily reveal to Saint Malachi whether these future claimants to the papacy were good or evil, and he did not reveal to him whether they were true popes or anti-popes. Saint Malachi was simply shown the men who until the end of human history would present themselves to the world as the leaders of the Catholic Church. Furthermore, as humanity moved closer and closer to the end of the world, God wanted people in the last days to have some idea how close they were to the second coming of Christ. St. Malachi's descriptions of future claimants to the papacy usually include at least one or more of the following things concerning the claimant: his coat of arms, his family's coat of arms, his birth name or birthplace, or cities in which he would live during his life. St. Malachi also described major figures or events that would overshadow the reigns of some of the claimants to the papacy. As mentioned earlier, the prophecies of St. Malachi were published for the first time in 1595. There is a controversy over St. Malachi's pre-1595 predictions. Many believe that since St. Malachi's list was only publicly available for the first time in 1595, the predictions referring to pre-1595 claimants constitute no proof of authenticity. Moreover, some believe that since St. Malachi's prophecy wasn't publicly released until hundreds of years after it was reportedly first made, doubt exists about the entire prophecy. However, a good response to that objection can be found by considering a very important biblical manuscript called Codex Vaticanus. Codex Vaticanus is considered to be the oldest surviving copy of an almost complete Bible. It was originally produced in the late 4th century, but its whereabouts were uncertain for more than 1,000 years until it was identified in the Vatican Library in the 15th century. So Codex Vaticanus, like St. Malachi's document, was discovered at the Vatican after being lost for an extremely long period of time. Yet biblical scholars generally accept Codex Vaticanus as authentic, despite its uncertain whereabouts for more than 1,000 years after its original production, a far longer period of time than St. Malachi's document was lost. Nevertheless, since there is controversy over the St. Malachi prophecies before 1595, we will not consider any examples of his predictions that concern papal claimants before 1595, but only those after 1595. St. Malachi describes Pope Innocent X as, quote, joyfulness of the cross. It is very interesting that Innocent X was finally elected Pope on the feast day of the Exaltation of the Cross, after a long and difficult conclave. St. Malachi describes Pope Pius VI as, quote, apostolic wanderer. During Pius VI's reign, he traveled to Germany to confer with Emperor Joseph II. In the last 2 years of his reign, he was forced by revolutionaries to flee Rome. After a very difficult journey over the Alps, he died in France. He was definitely a wanderer. St. Malachi describes Pope Pius VII as, quote, greedy eagle. This pope's reign was overshadowed by Napoleon, whose symbol was an eagle. Napoleon's complete reign as emperor took place during Pius VII's reign as pope. Napoleon and Pius VII were continually in conflict, Napoleon ordering that the pope comply with his demands. After Pius VII excommunicated Napoleon, he was kidnapped and imprisoned by Napoleon's officers. Eventually, Napoleon formed an agreement with Pius VII that weighed heavily in his own favor. St. Malachi describes Pope Pius IX as, quote, cross from the cross. Pius IX was the last pope to govern the Papal States. He ended up a prisoner in the Vatican after the House of Savoy, whose coat of arms is a white cross, reunited Italy and removed Pius IX from his control of the Papal States. St. Malachi describes Pope Leo XIII as, quote, light in the sky. Pope Leo XIII's coat of arms features a comet in the sky. Bishops of the Catholic Church create a coat of arms. Pope Leo XIII was made a bishop on February 19, 1843. That means that Leo XIII created his coat of arms, which featured a comet in the sky, 35 years before he became pope in 1878. He was thus identified with a light in the sky, long before he became pope or knew that he would become pope. St. Malachi describes Pope Pius X as, quote, fire burning. Pius X's reign saw the Russian-Japanese War, the Mexican Revolution, and the First and Second Balkan Wars. It was also at the end of his reign that World War I began, which set Europe on fire. St. Malachi describes Benedict XV as, quote, religion laid waste. Benedict XV reigned during World War I and the Communist Revolution in Russia, which led to millions of Catholics being put to death. On page 328 of his 1996 book Memoirs, Mikhail Gorbachev said that the Soviet communist state laid waste to religion by carrying out, quote, a wholesale war on religion, end quote. St. Malachi describes anti-pope John XXIII as, quote, pastor and sailor. During his reign, John XXIII would frequently wear clothing featuring a large sailboat. St. Malachi describes anti-pope Paul VI as, quote, flower of flowers. Interestingly, Paul VI happened to have 3 lily flowers on his coat of arms. St. Malachi describes anti-pope John Paul I as, quote, from the half moon. John Paul I began his reign on August 26, 1978, when the moon appeared exactly half full, so he literally began his reign from the half moon. John Paul I also comes from the Diocese of Belluno, which means, quote, beautiful moon. St. Malachi describes anti-pope John Paul II as, quote, of the solar eclipse. John Paul II was born on May 18, 1920, the day of a solar eclipse. On the day of John Paul II's funeral, April 8, 2005, there was also an eclipse of the sun. This is a striking fulfillment of St. Malachi's prophecy. On September 19, 1846, the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to two little children at La Salette, France, and predicted that, quote, Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. The Church will be in eclipse. Our Lady predicted that outside a remnant of Catholics who will preserve the true faith, most people will not see or find real Catholicism because, for one reason, the Church will seem to be dominated, blocked out, or eclipsed by something. That something was John Paul II. He was the eclipse of the Catholic Church. According to St. Malachi, the final claimant to the papacy in the history of mankind is described as Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman. St. Malachi says about the last claimant that, quote, in the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will feed the sheep in many tribulations. And when these things are finished, the city of 7 hills, Rome, will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The end. End quote. If St. Malachi's prophecy is correct, Antipope Francis will be the last person in history who will claim to be the Bishop of Rome. Keep in mind that St. Malachi predicted both popes and antipopes, whoever would claim to be the Bishop of Rome. The reason St. Malachi called him Peter the Roman is because St. Peter, as Bishop of Rome and the first pope, had the name Peter, and St. Malachi calls the last man who will claim to be the Bishop of Rome by the same name, Peter. And since Francis, according to St. Malachi's list, is the final claimant to the Roman See before the destruction of Rome, he calls him Peter the Roman. Another reason St. Malachi called Francis the Roman is that Francis has emphasized the title Bishop of Rome in a unique way. Antipope Francis has generally avoided the title of Pope and other titles associated with claimants to the papacy. The official Vatican directory lists a number of different titles for claimants to the papacy, but Francis has rejected all these titles except the one title of Bishop of Rome, which he specifically requested. Francis has stressed in a highly unusual way that he is merely acting as if his authority is limited locally to Rome. In fact, in his very first words after his quote election, Francis explicitly stated that the reason for a conclave was, quote, to give a bishop to Rome. Francis is perhaps the only claimant in history who mentioned the title, quote, Bishop of Rome, in his very first words to the world after his, quote, election. He was therefore immediately identified with Rome or in a particular way as a Roman. Quote, it was striking that in his initial appearances he repeatedly referred to himself as the Bishop of Rome, rather than emphasizing his role as an authority figure in the universal church. Also, Francis was the first claimant in history to sign his name in Italian rather than Latin in the Vatican's official directory. Italian is the language of modern Romans, which Francis happens to speak perfectly, whereas Latin is the language of the church throughout the world. This is another example of Francis's emphasis on a particular local or Roman role instead of a universal one. Interestingly, Francis chose the name of the most well-known saint of Italy, St. Francis of Assisi. Assisi is only 2 hours from Rome. During his life, St. Francis went to Rome, and St. Francis's middle name and his father's name happens to be Peter. St. Malachi also says that Peter the Roman will feed people during many tribulations. It is very interesting that while Antipope Francis doesn't care if someone rejects Jesus Christ or the Catholic faith, he does claim to care about physically feeding people in need. On page 129 of his 2010 book, Conversations with Jorge Bergoglio, Francis says the only sin being committed in Argentina is failing to provide food and work for people. He says nothing about sins against God and God's faith. Conversations with Jorge Bergoglio, page 129, quote, it is a problem of sin. For 4 years, Argentina has been living a sinful existence because it has not taken responsibility for those who have no food or work. If tribulations occurred in the world in which people were without food or other necessities, Francis would probably go to extremes to feed those people, and would therefore fulfill what St. Malachi says, he will feed the sheep in many tribulations. Non-Catholics who believe in St. Malachi's prophecies yet reject the Roman Catholic Church should deeply consider what St. Malachi says. He refers to the Roman Church, which everyone admits is the Roman Catholic Church, and he calls it, quote, holy. If the Roman Catholic Church were a false church, There would be no way that St. Malachy would describe it as, quote, holy, and only God could have given St. Malachy the ability to make such incredibly accurate predictions about the future. God would not have given such incredible insights about future events to a believer and leader of a false religion. What is also extremely interesting is that St. Malachy describes Rome being destroyed at the end of Francis's reign. If correct, this fits perfectly with the prophecies in the Apocalypse about how Babylon, Rome, is destroyed at the end of the world. Therefore, if St. Malachy's predictions are correct, Antipope Francis will be the last claimant to the papacy in history. So if 1,000 years from now we were to look back at the complete list of popes and antipopes in history, Francis would be described as the one at the end of the world. Francis has been described in news headlines as the end of the world pope, or the man from the end of the world, because Argentina, the country he comes from, is geographically located, some would say, at the end of the world. Perhaps in a way of unknowingly fulfilling prophecy, Francis made the following striking statement in his opening words to the people after his election as antipope. That is, during his very first address to the world from the balcony of St. Peter's. Francis said the other, quote, cardinals went all the way to the end of the world to find him, and then added, quote, here we are.
Voi sapete che il dovere del conclave era di dare un vescovo a Roma.
You know that the duty of the conclave was to give a bishop to Rome.
I fratelli cardinali sono andati a prenderlo quasi alla fine del mondo.
My fellow cardinals went and found one all the way at the end of the world, but here we are.
Francis has actually made a statement, Pope Francis has actually made a statement that my papacy will be for about 4 to 5 years. Now, already about 2 years have passed, 2 to 3 years have passed. So about 2 to 3 years remain. If this statement is correct, then we will perhaps witness the Malhama in the next 2 to 3 years. This is where it gains strategic importance. But what I'm saying, these Roman Catholics, they have the inside knowledge. Okay, so if this is true, if this prophecy is true, and these people, as I've said, these have inside knowledge, they are aware of a few things more than us. So if this is a reflection of their internal knowledge, what they have from the Illuminati, what we refer to as the Illuminati, the Freemasons, and the neocons, the Zionists. So if this inside knowledge, if we consider this statement not to be an independent statement, but an inside knowledge which they're deliberately trying to broadcast to the world, then the Malhama is approaching faster than we may have expected. So this is where this takes strategic significance. The prophecy, what has been referred to as the prophecy of the popes and Pope Francis, as the 112th Pope, is he the last Pope? And if that is true, then there are consequences.